Hello viewers, welcome to another edition of Region Talk on UE TV. I am your host, David Commisiong, and I have with me as my guest on this program, Dr. Pedro Welch, a man who wears many hats. First and foremost, historian, an academic, former Dean of the Faculty of Humanities at the KFL campus of UE, former Deputy Principal of the KFL campus, an elder in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, public intellectual, in fact, I would say one of the foremost public intellectuals of Barbados.
I'm flattered.
No, it's well-deserved, a well-deserved accolade. But for our purposes on this program, Dr. Welch is the chairman of the Barbados National Task Force on Reparations. And we are going to be talking principally reparations on this program. So welcome, Dr. Welch.
My pleasure to be here.
Well, I want to get right into it. When we say that a tremendous crime against humanity was committed against the African people of the Caribbean during those centuries of European-imposed enslavement and colonialism. And we say that the correct response to that crime is a process of reparatory justice or a remedy of reparations. What precisely are we saying?
Certainly, I think it's important for us to recognize that the term reparations in itself has a very checkered past in terms of what it has been held to mean over the years. But generally speaking, if we boil it down to its simplest background, reparation has to do with repair. It has to do with restoration, and I like these alliterative notions. It has to do with regeneration. And in our context, reparations has to do with the repair of damage that has been done to our people. There's what I may call a psychopathology, which has impacted on our people's thinking for generations. And we can trace that back to the horror, the Holocaust of Caribbean enslavement within the Caribbean, enslavement of Africans. And for us, reparations then begins first by looking at what that damage has been and attempting to quantify it. Attempting to, not only to quantify it, but also to qualify it, to determine what kind of damage are we talking about. I've already made the point that the damage is psychological in one context, but there's also physical dimension to that. It's a crime in the sense that people were stolen initially. And even though we can accept, and I will be one of the first to accept, that some of our ancestors might have played a part in what happened to our people, the fact is that those who went into Africa and took our people were involved in a kind of a theft. It's a theft of culture. It's a theft of human beings. A theft of their potential. So all these are issues which need to be addressed and need to be repaired. There's an international dimension to it, and you're better qualified to speak out the whole question of international law and how that speaks to the point that we're making. But generally speaking, you're talking about a repair and a restoration, a regeneration, and doing something about the harm that's been done to our people. It's really a harm. That's what we're talking about.
I like to, in trying to define this process of reparations, I like to talk about a dual process, that there's an outwardly directed struggle where we are making demands against the representatives of those institutions and nations that committed this terrible crime against our people, our ancestors, and profited from that crime. So an outwardly directed struggle. But I also say that there's concomitant with that an inwardly directed struggle where we have to look inward and look at what was done to us and how do we repair that damage inwardly? How do we look at ourselves, our psyches, our culture, and how do we say whatever there is within us of any notion of black inferiority or white superiority, that we have to remove that, that we have to restore ourselves. Is that a helpful construct?
Absolutely. I was hoping I could get there as well.
Okay.
Certainly, when I talk about repair, the notion of an inwardly directed process has to do with self-repair. And when I say self-repair, I'm not suggesting that the responsibility for that repair lies only with the individual. Self-repair has to do with the fact that our people, and the mass of our people had been subjected over the centuries to this crime, and the impact has been so severe that it has warped the persona of some of our people. To give an example of what I mean, when I'm talking about this self-directed repair, we have persons who think of blackness as somehow being a curse. There is something wrong with us.
People who bleach their skins.
Yeah, they bleach their skins, and if they see someone, I mean, it is not uncommon for two people in a quarrel or struggle, for somebody to hurl the say, "You're black." So as though blackness somehow was something seriously marred, something wrong, so wrong with it. Then you have persons in Barbados today who will make statements such as this: you only have to put something in the hands of a white man, and you will get it done. Those are notions that speak to what I referred to earlier as psychopathology, a damage which is deep in the psyche. There are persons who will come behind my head, I suspect yours as well too, and will stroke the hand of my head and say, "You got good hair." I said, "There's something inherently bad." I mean, I remember
pretty hair.
Pretty hair.
You know, the first time I heard that term was in Barbados. Pretty hair. This idea of pretty
this is
hair.
the notion they have. I mean, the Cuban poet Nicolas Guillen wrote a poem called Songoro Kosongo. And this poem has to do with his observation of women of African descent walking the streets of Havana. And as they walk the streets of Havana, he is saying that these women are declaring, "We are not African, we are European." And he's saying that he observes them. This is a poem. He observes them, and as they walk, he says he observes something very special about them. He says he observes the trasera. Trasera is the backside. And as he observes these women, he says that with each step they make, they say mentira, mentira, mentira. And he's saying what it means is you lie, you lie, you lie. In other words, they are seeking to escape.
Their very body is telling them.
The very body is saying, I mean, what some of my African friends would tell me, African pride.
Yeah.
That's what's happening to our people.
But you know, I say, for me,
yes,
the very first principle of reparations or of the reparations movement is that it is that reparations or the demand for reparations is an intrinsic validation by us of our humanity. Because so I make the point that aside from whether this reparations campaign ends up with us gaining resources from the representatives of our historical oppressors, but the mere fact of making the demand for reparations is important.
Yes.
Because what we are saying when we make the demand, when we demand that those representatives of those institutions and nations that committed the most horrible crimes possible against our ancestors must be held accountable and must be made to recompense in some way we are saying that our ancestors, and by extension ourselves, were sacred beings deserving of respect and justice. So for me, making the very demand for reparations is important in itself, and it is a sign that we are reclaiming our humanity.
Well, certainly, I mean, you just inserted into your statement the word justice. I'm thinking of two other words which are connected. The whole question of equity and the whole question of morality. These are issues which are bound together. And justice demands, in my view, justice demands that our people stand up and make the demand and state very clearly that what happened in universalist terms, it was so horrendous. It was so much an attack on our existence that we have to challenge those who benefited from enslavement, and we also have to ensure that they understand what was done to us. And I say us because a lot of persons believe that enslavement is so far away that we ought not to pay any attention to it. But I've often...
Just yesterday.
It's just yesterday. I mean, I see people in Barbados born 100 years ago. And when I work back that,
their grandparents.
Some of these people had grandparents who were enslaved people. Yeah. So I spoke at a function once, and Dr. Bertie Graham, late Dr. Bertie Graham was there. And he said he knew his grandmother. And at the time I was speaking, he told me his grandmother was a slave. And that is something he knew. So it's not as far as you think.
But so you are very much involved in the making of this demand and in that whole organized campaign. Yeah. So tell the viewers a little bit about the structure of the governmental reparations movement of which you are a part, because I think it will help us to frame the rest of the discussion. You are the chairman of the Barbados National Task Force, which is a governmental committee. But give us an idea of the structure of the movement.
Yes, well, let me begin that description by also acknowledging that you are also very much a part of this movement. Simply put, several years ago, I know that there are persons not only in the Caribbean but in Britain and elsewhere in Africa who were launching the struggle for it. I'm not even going to go yet at this point to refer to our enslaved ancestors who were leading the struggle, but we had persons who within the Caribbean who had launched a formal protest, formal demand. The Rastafarians certainly were among the first to launch that demand. But then we also have, in Jamaica, you have the establishment of a reparations commission, a commission for reparations.
The Jamaican government.
The Jamaican government established that very early on. But then, following the Durban conference, which most Pan-Africanists will know of, and a lot of other persons' interests in what happened to our people will know of.
The World Conference
Against Racism. The government of Barbados, in particular, I'm making reference to that one, decided to establish. They did establish a Pan-African Commission. I think around that same just before.
1998.
1998, right?
Pan-African Commission.
Exactly. But then, following that, now they decided there was an expansion of what they call a Pan-Africanist agenda from the point of view of the government. What happened subsequent to that is that you have. Just about 5 years ago, the Barbados government decides to establish the task force on reparations. But at that same time, the Jamaican commission, which had lapsed somewhat, was re-energized, and then there was a decision to push the matter not so much from an individual island basis, but from a Caribbean-wide basis. And what happened at that point is that there was a conference, a meeting of minds of various representatives from several Caribbean countries in St. Vincent, where the CARICOM Reparations Commission was launched.
Right.
and became an organ of the CARICOM.
Right. So we now have at the CARICOM level,
Yes.
the CARICOM Reparations Commission.
Yes.
And you, as the head of the Barbados
Yes.
National Commission,
Yes, I sit on that.
sit on the CARICOM.
Yes. Now there are other territories which also have they have various names. Some of them we refer to the Reparations Committee as a commission.
Yeah.
In our case, it is called a task force,
Right.
but they essentially serve the same function, which is to push the local cause as well. The whole question of self-repair comes into that discussion as well.
Okay. Well,
and then you have the CARICOM.
Okay, good. So I think you have, in giving that structure,
Yes.
you have established a good frame
Yes.
for us to carry our discussion a little deeper
Yes.
in the segments to come.
Okay,
So we
sure.
will end this segment here and come back
Yes,
with
yes.
carry our discussion a bit
Absolutely, yes.
Move your career forward and gain the expertise you need with a postgraduate degree from Mona School of Business and Management, the premier business school in the Caribbean. Visit us online to learn more about our suite of cutting-edge programs and to submit your application. MSBM, Forward Thinking.
Welcome back to Region Talk. Dr. Welch, Pedro.
Yes,
I feel more
Pedro.
comfortable calling you
No, Pedro. That's my name.
When we
One of
close, when we closed the last segment,
Yes.
we were talking about the CARICOM
Yes.
Reparations Commission.
Yes.
And if we can't talk about the CARICOM Reparations Commission and not talk about a man called Hilary Beckles.
Yes, yes,
So
yes.
Hilary Beckles.
Yes.
I have here with me two of his very
Yes.
important publications. Britain's Black Debt, Reparations for Caribbean Slavery and Native Genocide,
Yes.
which I consider a magnum opus
Oh, yes.
on the whole topic of reparations. And his latest book, The First Black Slave Society, where he's actually looking at the construction of the institution of
Yes.
slavery in the Caribbean and Barbados in particular. But Sir Hilary has played a very important role in this reparations movement, not only as the chairman of the CARICOM Reparations Commission, but also in terms of his work as an historian. So maybe you could fill in a little bit more of the structure and the role that Sir Hilary
Yes.
has been playing in constructing this movement.
Certainly, the CARICOM Commission, Reparations Commission, represents what we call a maturing of the reparations cause in the Caribbean. There's a very strong input in terms of the structural contributions of the various territories, a very strong input from the various Caribbean territories into the agenda of the CARICOM Reparations Commission. When we met in St. Vincent, the very first meeting, we came up with, we initiated what is known more generally as a 10-point plan for reparations. And that certainly demonstrates what they call the wide input from the various Caribbean territories. But there's no doubt that the leadership of Sir Hilary has been a very important factor in the reparations movement. The CARICOM, at the first meeting, there was a unanimous acclaim for this professor, and he was, in fact, named to be the first chairman by his peers, by those who attended the meeting, which you attended as well, of course. What happened is that subsequent to that, those initial meetings, there were continued meetings with the CARICOM heads of government, and out of those meetings, the momentum has moved on a bit, in the sense that letters have been written by the heads of government to various European countries, informing them of our interests in the matter. And I'm using the word interest there at this particular point without saying much more than that. In addition to that, the CARICOM Commission has helped to galvanize reparations movements across the world. In the United States of America, at a huge conference which was held there, a couple of years ago, that bore the imprint of what they call this maturing in the Caribbean.
In fact, they established the National African American Reparations
Yes,
Commission,
also that, yes,
using the CARICOM
Yes.
initiative as a model.
Oh yes, so that you not only in the USA, but in Britain, the reparations movement in Britain seems to have viewed the CARICOM and the Caribbean Renaissance, and they call it that, as somehow further validated their cause. So there's no doubt that the Caribbean experience, the structural form of the reparations movement, as well as the activity of the reparations movement, has had a big impact. But Sir Hillary,
But before you go, because I think it's important for us to record this, to make a proper record of this. That this development that took place in the Caribbean, 2012, around 2012, 2013, has had a tremendous galvanizing effect on the reparations cause right across the world. And so it's historic. And I don't think we should conclude this part of our discussion without mentioning a man called Ralph Gonsalves.
Oh yes, yes.
Prime Minister Gonsalves, as we would know, we know that when our Barbados Task Force was set up, we had this idea of pulling together a Caribbean conference to establish a CARICOM reparations commission. But once the idea was introduced to Prime Minister Gonsalves,
the momentum,
he just took it and ran with it, and we thought it was going to be a very difficult thing to accomplish, but in his hands, it was done.
Oh yes.
Were you surprised at the time at the effectiveness of Prime Minister Gonsalves in getting this, making this thing a reality?
I think I know the individual of whom we speak, and I know his what they call his planning matrix. I've seen him. He used to be a lecturer at the University of West Indies, and since the early days, some of us have observed him in action. But certainly the speed with which the thing happened, and what I may call the comprehensiveness of the planning that went into the discussions under his leadership, I think that was a little surprising that we managed to achieve it so quickly. Because in a very short time at the conference, I mean, the decisions had been made. We had made plans, and certainly until St. Vincent will go now forever, the honor of being the first country to organize this regional reparations movement. So certainly, Comrade Ralph Gonsalves is certainly the one person whose name will be forever linked to this reparations cause. We also have to bear in mind also that at the CARICOM level, that the heads of government of CARICOM, that in general, again, I think if I'm not mistaken, he was chairman at the time of the heads of government group. I'm not, could be wrong, yes. But many of these persons accepted the call. And CARICOM approved the formation of the CARICOM Reparations Commission. And subsequently, that has had a very strong relationship with the forward movement of the reparations. Back to the question of Hilary Beckles and his scholarship. I mean, since he has become so connected with the reparations movement that he is sought after all over the world. Just recently at Harvard University, spoke to the British Parliament. I mean, you name it. His name has become associated with the global reparations cause. And I think that that the CARICOM group chose well.
Oh, yes.
When they made that decision. Of course, there are a lot of other what they call local contributors who will become what we call unsung heroes. Throughout the Caribbean, we had persons from Suriname, we have persons from Guyana, we have persons from the French Caribbean. Although French Caribbean is not part of CARICOM, they were very much present at our CARICOM conference. We had persons from Britain, from North America, across the Caribbean, even from countries which one would not necessarily have associated with a strong Pan-Africanist or reparationist cause before. So the thing has caught the Caribbean, I think.
Yes, it's, and so the Caribbean can be justly proud that we have played a very important role in re-galvanizing this movement, because the movement has always existed.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
I mean,
Yes.
you know, one scholar puts the beginning of the reparations campaign way back in 1570,
Yes.
when, and this is Nora Whitman I'm speaking about
Yes,
in
yes.
her book, Slavery Reparations Time is Now.
Yes.
She traces the beginning of the movement back to an enslaved African called Gaspar Yanga, who in 1570 led a revolt in Mexico, established a maroon community, and then proceeded to plunder the white community and their property as a form, in his word, of compensation
Yes.
for all that had been taken from them during their slavery sojourn. So she says that if we can go right back into slavery to see instances of enslaved people actually saying something wrong has been done to us, we have been deprived, and we are entitled to be compensated. But in this contemporary phase, much credit really has to go to the Caribbean.
Yeah.
And I would like to just mention one other great Caribbean man who was passed on, but I speak of Ambassador Dudley Thompson.
Oh, yes, yes, Dudley
of
Thompson.
Jamaica, who
Yes.
was very instrumental back in the early 90s
Yes, yes.
in leading the African
yes, yes.
continent, the Organization of African
Yes,
Unity, to
yes.
set up that group of eminent persons on reparations.
Perhaps one day we must do what they call a biography of the reparations movement.
Yes,
And in that biography, we'll have to do justice to these figures. Certainly, I mean, when you mention Nora Whitman's work and the whole question of tracing the reparations cause, not just to some contemporary movement, but back to the 1570s, I'm thinking of what happens in Barbados and the rest of the Caribbean. I'm focusing on Barbados at this point because many persons in Barbados will not be fully aware of the demand for justice from many of our ancestors. When we think of Nanny Grigg, when we think of Bussa, when we think of other enslaved leaders in Barbados, when we think also of our forefathers who, after emancipation, led what Dr. Henderson Carter calls the potato rats. This was a form of compensation. People were seeking to get what was theirs. When you look in, for example, in 1897 at a commission which comes to the Caribbean and looks at Barbados to see what's happening here, one of the planters who went before that commission confessed that after emancipation, what the planters had done is they had restricted access to land by our forefathers. They had also lowered their wages. And what they did is they made them plant yams and sweet potatoes and edders and pigeon peas and other things. And in addition to paying them low wages and charging them rent for the land that they're renting in the tenantries, they also charged them for those crops.
This brings me to another point.
Yes.
And I think another way of looking at the reparations campaign, the reparations effort, is to say that reparations is part and parcel of an effort to complete the emancipation process.
Yes.
The British passed the Abolition of Slavery Act, the Emancipation Act in 1833, but we know that even though in a technical sense slavery was quote-unquote abolished, that the former enslavers did everything possible to keep our ancestors in as slave-like a condition as possible. And so part of the rationale for reparations is that we now need to complete that emancipation process that started so long ago?
Oh, absolutely. There's no doubt that that many of our forefathers suffered in ways that still have their impact today. When we go through the Caribbean and we look at the peasantry within the Caribbean, when we look at the working class within the Caribbean, we can trace many of the current disabilities, not to 350 years ago, but just a short while ago. It was not until 1937 that the Masters and Servants Act, which is a relic of the enslavement period, was repealed in Barbados, 1937. And then it took several more years. Even the Tenantry Freehold Act, passed in Barbados in the 1970s, is a reminder that the battle was not still over.
Okay. So we're going to talk some more about this idea of reparations being an effort to complete the emancipation process when we come back for our next segment.
Caribbean Matters.
Welcome back to Region Talk, and our guests on this program, Dr. Pedro Welch, the chairman of the Barbados National Task Force on Reparations and a member of the CARICOM Reparations Commission. Pedro, we were talking about reparations being an effort to complete the process of emancipation that was really never fully consummated because concrete efforts were made to hold back our ancestors after slavery was officially abolished in the 19th century. But that brings me to people like yourself, the historians, our Caribbean historians, because it seems to me that central to reparations is a profound understanding of our history. It is our history that has to guide us as to what happened, what was done to us, what kinds of negative arrangements were put in place to hold us back. And therefore our history has to guide us as to what we need to do now to undo some of those obstacles, some of those negative things, and to complete this process of emancipation. So I'm saying the historian is central to this whole process. How do you see it?
Well, I speak from being a participant observer from that perspective. But let me answer you first by noting that Sir Hilary, in a recent lecture here in Barbados, pointed to Sir Arthur Lewis and a statement that Sir Arthur Lewis made in one of his publications. I think it might be Labour in the West Indies. And he made the point that Sir Arthur Lewis had said that there's one unfinished issue which has to be dealt with, which has to be the whole question of centuries of unpaid labor. That has to be sorted out. And that was Arthur Lewis.
I think that booklet was written around about 1938.
Yes, it's written just around between the time of the what we call the rebellions in the Caribbean and the Second World War. That is correct. So certainly the question of the consciousness of our people and how that consciousness is galvanized comes into the discussion, and that's where the historian comes in. In every society which has made its mark, wherever you can find, whether you're talking about a literate society or pre-literate society, they've always been those persons who have been responsible for chronicling and interpreting and analyzing our history. In Africa, you have the griots, who are responsible for maintaining a lot of what they call the cultural connections which people have with the past. In our modern age, or more modern age, we have persons, professional historians, whose training has enabled them to go back into the past and to unearth data and to bring up data to bear on an understanding of what happened to our people. Unfortunately, in our current age, there has been a de-emphasis on history. As in an earlier conversation, I was pointing out that you go to any major society, any the so-called industrialized societies, go into their libraries, go into their universities, and you're going to find with every discipline, whether it's medicine, whether it is the sciences, you have a section for the history or the philosophy of these things. It is because persons recognize the importance of the historian, of the philosopher, of the social scientist in providing context, in providing information.
We were discussing this a little earlier,
Yes.
because we were saying
Yes.
that the study of history is central to this quest for reparations, our understanding of our history. And we are finally at a point, certainly in the Caribbean, and we can speak about Barbados,
Yes.
where we now have indigenous historians who are doing the research work, who are writing the books. Hilary Beckles.
Yes.
In the case of Barbados,
You have-
Dr. David Brown.
Yes. Yes.
Dr.
Henderson Carter.
Henderson Carter.
Yes.
In the Caribbean,
You have-
Tony Martin.
Yes, yes.
Right, the Trinidadian
Yes.
historian. And so for the first time, because when I went to secondary school in Barbados in
good
the
Lord.
1970s, we did history, but the textbooks that we were using were, some old colonial histories, British historians who were writing rather superficially about our history. But now that we have the Beckleses and the Martins and the Browns and the Carters and the Pedro Welches, because you yourself have produced a number of studies, it seems to me that this discipline of history is being phased out of our school system. And this is very troubling.
Very much so. When you look at the curriculum in many of our schools, secondary schools in particular, what you have is there's an emphasis on what is called social studies, and there's a de-emphasis on the teaching of history. There's a failure to understand that the tools of history serve as a foundation for many other disciplines. Certainly, when you were mentioning some of these persons, I'm also thinking of other stalwarts like Orlando Patterson in his book, The Sociology of Slavery, which is one of those pioneer works that came up in the 1960s that began to point the way forward. We have work like the West Indian Slave Laws by Elsie Govaya. And then when we think of other scholars like Professor Vereen Shepherd of Jamaica, who is very closely connected with the reparations cause in Jamaica. In fact, she's chair of the Jamaican Commission. When we think of people like Heather Cato from Trinidad and Kathleen Monteith from Jamaica, I mean, the list goes on and it goes on and it goes on. These works have now illuminated us much of our history. But while we have this renaissance, while we have this enlargement of the hive, this educational hive, this historical hive, what's been happening at the same time is that within our school curricula, I'm not sure if I can say, even from the point of view of the regional examination system, there has not been a recognition of the importance of history. We need to, and even in the context of the cost of education, there are persons who are attempting to quantify that cost in terms which suggest you should offer maths, you should offer the sciences. But history, anybody can do that. But I often say that that you have persons who can claim to be historians in the sense that they were present at some event. But I've always said to those persons who say, well, we don't need any professional historian, we were there. And I often said, you were there, but you can't be everywhere at the same time. You can't see every possible thing. You were there, so you're interpreting things from a particular vantage point. But the historian now can distill evidence coming from others other than yourself and bring that to bear on the analysis.
So I think I will arrogate the right to speak for Region Talk.
Yes.
And from Region Talk, we would like to send a message to our heads of government
Yes.
that if we are serious about this reparations campaign, if we are serious about this CARICOM Reparations Commission that we have set up and the mission that it has been given, and if we are serious about these national committees and task forces on reparations, then history is central to this process. And it is critical that our young people be taught their history,
Oh, yes.
that they get a good understanding of their society, where it came from, what its trajectory was, what are some of the negatives that we need to have, the obstacles that were put in place that we need to have an understanding about, a historical understanding. So this is crucial. And what makes it tragic is that it is not that we don't have the historical works. It's not that our scholars have not been doing the work. There's today an abundance of work. So there could be no excuse for us for history not having its rightful place in the curriculum of every single Caribbean state.
You know, even as we make that point and we issue the challenge to our leaders, I often reflect on the fact that several of our foremost thinkers are persons with a background in history. I'm going to mention Sir Hilary Beckles again. In terms of his scholarship, in terms of the things he's been involved in over the years. And I think of many of the students I taught, even at secondary school, many of them who I taught history became lawyers and went into other professions. And I can think of a number of names, I won't call them here, but the fact remains that the foundation for their disciplines, for their later entry into other professions, really started in that history classroom. Yes.
Anyhow, let's get back to reparations.
Oh, yes.
We said that part of reparations is this idea that we are making an effort to consummate that emancipation process, but we are also making an effort to produce the just society.
Yes.
Part of the process of reparative justice must be, the end result must be the just society.
Yes.
Would you agree? I
would certainly agree. This is an argument which, in fact, is central to the book British Black Debt by Sir Hilary Beckles, because when he seeks to point out that the cause, that pursuing the cause is of benefit, benefit not only to those of us who are descendants of the formerly enslaved, but to the former enslavers, to those societies, and that they should also have an interest in justice and seeking what we would call the just society. The demand for reparatory justice is not a pie in the sky notion. It's a notion that is founded on the best philosophical scholarship that we can find anywhere. You mentioned earlier Nora Whitman's book, and a gentleman called Alfred Brophy, who has written much on the philosophy of reparations. When we examine these books, when we examine these works, it is clear to me that the reparations cause, and in our contemporary period, it is not simply an academic exercise. It's an exercise in seeking justice. And I used the word earlier, equity. And I want to use that word, morality. There's an excellent work, Justice, Morality, Justice and Equity, by a man called Les Brown. That work demonstrates very clearly that the notions of equity and justice are central to humanity.
And I would like to, just to break it down a little more, that when we speak about the end result that we're aiming for, that just society, we are speaking about both in the just society in terms of our domestic society, but we are also talking about the just society in terms of the international system.
That's the point.
Because we're also looking for a just international society, a new order of international relations and international relationships.
Very quickly, let me put a question to you. You know, you're the one asking the question a few minutes ago.
Sure.
I put the question out this. What is it that we have a United Nations where the central governing committees are monopolized by European countries?
The Security Council,
Security Council, for example.
No African.
You can't have a just society where a large proportion of the Earth's population is excluded by virtue of the fact that they're not resident in large numbers, in proportion numbers in those societies. So if we're talking about just society, it moves beyond the issue that may exist between Barbados and the rest of the Caribbean and Britain. This is an issue which has worldwide implications. The national law issues that are involved there tell me that the just society is a universalist theme, and that is one that we must push for at every level of our reparations cause.
And and just to cap off that that point, I would like to say that the person, because we have reparations activists all over the world, but the reparations activists that really brought that home to me, that concept of reparations producing the just society, is Dr. Julius Garvey, the son of the great Marcus Mosiah Garvey. Yes, that's a concept that he articulates very often. So, okay, so I think we will close this segment now, and then we will come back with our concluding segment where we will tie a lot of these points together.
Okay.
My name is Kai Bridgewater. I'm the president of the Guild of Students for the K-Ville campus for the academic year 2017-2018, and you are watching UE TV.
Welcome back to our concluding segment on Region Talk. On this program, we are looking very closely at the whole concept of reparations and the reparations movement. And we are speaking to a very special guest, Dr. Pedro Welch, the chairman of the Barbados National Task Force on Reparations. Pedro, I feel very passionately that reparations the reparations campaign must be a mass movement. In fact, I think that it will only be successful if it is a mass movement. I think that as much as I laud the governments, and as much as I appreciate the governmental committees that have been put in place, the CARICOM commission that has been put in place, yet I am conscious that unless we reach the mass of our people, and unless they enlist themselves in a mass reparations movement, that we will not achieve reparations. Do you share a similar perspective?
To some extent. Certainly, earlier you spoke about an outwardly directed process of reparations and an inwardly directed process of reparations. And both of these contexts or these processes require us to reach deep down into our local societies. Perhaps that may be one of the weaknesses of the current reparations movement, and that we have not succeeded yet in fully galvanizing the mass action, a mass movement. When I reflect on the work of the late, great Marcus Mosiah Garvey and the spread of his UNIA and through the Caribbean, through Africa, you name it, throughout the world. This was a movement that provides, for me, in my view, something of the template that we might want to look towards when we are looking at the whole question of grounding a mass movement in the reparations theme, or the other way around, grounding the reparations theme in a mass movement. However, I still believe strongly that that there is already some mass representation in the various local committees, task forces, commissions throughout the Caribbean. There's been a very careful attempt to enlist representation from various movements. We have, for example, in the Barbados task force, we have representatives of the Rastafari community. We have local activists. I'm thinking of Reverend Buddy Laria. I'm thinking of representatives of the Pan-Africanist movement. Buddy represents what is known as
non-state
actors. And I believe, and there are other groupings, but I agree with you that the reparations cause will not succeed to its fullest extent unless you have buy-in, unless the masses are incorporated into the discussion. As I said, part of the incorporation of the masses involves that process of inward direction, because a lot of our people do not yet understand where they should be involved, where they should even consider reparations. Some people will say, look me full in the face and say to me, "You're wasting time. What reparations?" In fact, I went to a ministry, a local ministry, I won't call the name of that ministry, in Barbados, where one of the senior officers said to me, "Our people, our forefathers, they sold us into slavery. What reparations are talking about? You're wasting time."
But that's testimony to that person's historical ignorance.
Yes.
So this is why, we come full circle, because in order to achieve the mass movement, we have to have the education programs, the history education programs, that we are able to permit a mass of our people to really re-examine our history, re-examine themselves, get a better understanding of what we accomplished as a people in our autonomous African civilization before the Holocaust of European enslavement. So that education, that consciousness raising process that is going to call not only for educators and historians, but the artists, the cultural artists, the performing artists. There has to be a mass educational and cultural program that is capable of reaching tens, hundreds of thousands of people right across the Caribbean region.
Well, I have a sense that there should be what we call an international dimension to the mass movement, and I'm using the word mass here in a very wide sense. To agree with you that dovetailing our activities with what we may call interests in several parts of the world. Africa, you mentioned Africa. I'm thinking of the African Union. In terms of what's happening in Latin America, Britain, across the world, that dovetailing our interests with theirs will help to propel our own cause. We're going to need that support. There's absolutely no doubt about it. We're going to need that support. But I can already say that some of that has already begun. In other words, when we mentioned earlier about what happened in the United States of America, and how CARICOM and what was happening here in the Caribbean helped to galvanize some activity and action, which shall really be waiting for some time. Also in Britain, we have that, something's happening as well too. Some time ago, I was invited by a group in one of the English counties to do an interview with them online, because they had seen some evidence of what's happening in the Caribbean. They wanted to be connected with that. I think another group also invited Sir Hillary to speak to them. I've also received communication from people in France and other places. So there is a sense in which there is a mass movement that's already beginning. I suppose the difficulty and that's require careful crafting is, how do you mobilize that mass movement? How do you mobilize that international mass movement? I believe that, that the CARICOM Commission is in an excellent position to forge those connections. But apart from that, our local activists, the non-state actors, the various groups, the Pan-Africanists, they already have those international connections. And it's a matter of crafting some, what I call a fairly tight collective among the people of like thought, like mind across the world. I think can be done. So I agree with you. I believe it has to be a phase, because whatever happens in our initial discussions, we have to see in the creation of a just society, something that may take some time.
Yeah.
So you need that broad support across the world.
Yeah, I think it's wrong for us to see it as just a short sprint. We have to be in this campaign for the long haul.
Oh yes.
Because we in the Anglophone Caribbean, we are targeting Britain.
Yes.
We are targeting the British government.
Although you do understand that the letters that were sent recently by CARICOM, and that is public knowledge now, that the letters were sent not only to Britain, but were sent to other European countries.
Well, I mean, because when we look at responsibility for the enslavement of African people, we are talking Portugal, Spain, Britain, France, Belgium,
Sweden,
United States of America, because for 100 years after they got their independence, they maintained slavery. So basically, the countries of Western Europe and their kith and kin in North America. And so my feeling is that we have to bring together on the other side, the African continent.
Yes.
The black populations of Latin America, but also the relevant governments of Latin America.
Yes.
As our natural allies or co-partners in the campaign. But also, I think we need to engage in international diplomacy to Asiatic governments and countries. And I would like to see, we talk about the Reparations Commission taking on a lot of this work, but I would like to see our ambassadors, our embassies all over the world being given this as a mission.
Well, you've identified an important arm in the struggle, and yes, I agree with you. But just as you were speaking now, and we mentioned all these countries, I don't know how many of our people observing a simple thing like football being played in Russia. And those places where there are elements of racism in Russia. And how many people are aware that Russia also was a slave-owning state under the Tsars and that later. And that the Russia's greatest novelist, a man called Alexander Pushkin, is of African descent. And that his father was known as General, he was also one of the Hannibals. He was a General Hannibal, also of African descent. So that although we're not aware of Russia being a country that had any strong history of enslavement, that is also there. So that the origin of the racism that you see is not something that just happened. There's an historical antecedent that drives that kind of behavior. We find it in Poland. We find it in some of those Eastern European countries. There is a lot of misunderstanding of who we Africans are. And in some cases, there's a latent racism that again owes its origin to that enslavement period. So it's not just these countries you mentioned, but a whole lot of them who also have to be included. So when we're reaching out, even to Asia, we have some cousins and some aunts and uncles and others in Asian countries too.
It has to be a worldwide movement. It's a cause that is much larger than just us, the African people of the Caribbean. In fact, it is a cause that is going to unite African, non-white people, African people, oppressed people, or people who have come from a history of oppression all over the world.
Yes.
But I know that we are coming to the end of our program, but I would like to ask you, in your capacity as chairperson of the Barbados Task Force, and knowing that we are, through this program, we will be speaking to a university audience right across the Caribbean. Any final word that you would like to leave with the young people, the young students of our university, the students of our region, about the reparations cause?
Well, I would really want to say to our young people in particular, but to our audience generally, that the struggle for reparations is a struggle that requires sacrifice. I want to lay the sacrifice as a central theme in fighting the struggle. We have to move out of our comfort zones and confront ourselves, because many of us, if not all of us, have been harmed psychologically by what happened to our forefathers and to us. And it has had a tremendous impact on our thinking, how we think about ourselves. So in order for us to push this cause of reparations, is going to require that what they call that sacrifice. A sacrifice, in some cases, of time, and energy and effort to seek information, to understand what will happen to our people. Many of us are abysmally ignorant of what happened to our people. We think it is so long ago, but if we would only look into our own families and ask ourselves the question, how did we come to be in the social positions that we are in now? And just step back a few years, just go back in the past just a little bit, and we discover that we have all been very hit hard by an experience that none of us invited, but which is forced upon us. So sacrifice, that is the central theme.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it has really been my pleasure on this episode of Region Talk to be speaking reparations with one of the Caribbean's outstanding historians, one of Barbados's most outstanding public intellectuals, Dr. Pedro Welch. Pedro, thank you so very much.
My pleasure, my pleasure.
Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this program. Remember, you can watch this and all our programs on our website, www.uitv.org, available anytime, anywhere, and on any device. Also, join the conversation on social media by visiting our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages.